Good evening and welcome to my second live stream. If you are watching this on the replay, thanks for watching, and feel free to add, even though you can't participate in the live chat, feel free to add comments in response to any questions I ask or any comments about anything I say here, really. Also, I just want to mention real quick, if you want to add to the comments and give a suggestion for future live streams, I am open to that to see what people want to talk about on these. So for those who are watching live, thank you so much for being here. Freedom Lover, I see you. Thanks for being here. And I really appreciate your participation. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the cost of beekeeping. And this was a topic that was suggested for a live stream. And it's a topic that comes up a lot for new beekeepers. And it's a topic that's hard to nail down. There's a lot of variables involved in beekeeping. So as I was trying to prepare for this live stream, I tried to put some notes together to kind of help clarify the information. And it is kind of hard to nail down, but we'll go over some information. I'm also going to have a special guest on, my friend Elizabeth, the curly-haired country gal. And I will post a link to her channel in the description of this video once it is posted. And I encourage you to go check out her channel. I'll introduce her more in a little bit. In addition to being a homesteader and a beekeeper, she also teaches online Spanish classes. And so that's why we're starting tonight a half hour late, is to give her time for those responsibilities. So she'll be joining us in a little bit, but I'll go ahead and get started into things. Not sure how many are online here yet, but I'd be interested, for those who are online, I have a question to start us out, and curious about what is your greatest beekeeping expense for getting and this, if you've been in beekeeping for several years, what's your biggest ongoing expense? I guess I should say, but curious to know where people feel like they're spending the most money getting into beekeeping. And I see Elizabeth is joining. Elizabeth, I'll bring you online here in just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is go through a spreadsheet. I listed out some of what I think are the expenses, and I think expenses for beekeeping are very different if you are a conventional beekeeper or if you are a natural beekeeper. And I think being a natural beekeeper helps to save a lot. So Jeffrey Evans, half hives, half bees. Yeah, I can see that. And that's kind of what I feel is most people are probably putting most of their money into the equipment or the bees. But I'm going to go ahead and bring Elizabeth on here. I'll introduce her a little bit and then bring her on. And then I'm going to share a little spreadsheet I've been working on the last few days. As I mentioned, Elizabeth, the curly-haired country gal, is a homesteader from here in Missouri. And I have worked with her in getting set up on bees and building some hive equipment. And she's doing a lot of good work in promoting natural treatment-free beekeeping. And so let's go ahead and bring Elizabeth on. Elizabeth, glad to see you here.
Thank you, Monty. It's so good to see you again.
So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my spreadsheet, and we can talk through this kind of together, and you can let me know of anything that you see missing. Hey, Swarmstead, how you doing, Bruce? Good to see you here. And so, Elizabeth, you can let me know in person if you see anything missing or if you think any of my expenses are off. And those in the chat, go ahead and drop your comments in if there's anything that you think I'm missing. So I'm going to go ahead and add this on here. And
thumbs up if you love a good spreadsheet. I'm a big thumbs up here. I've got spreadsheets for my spreadsheets.
Everything I do, it has to go into a spreadsheet. I'm too scatterbrained otherwise to try to keep information together. But so as I was putting this together, I'm thinking we have, equipment like Jeffrey Evans was saying. I think equipment is probably one of the biggest expenses. And that's kind of where I started this. But even that, there's so many variables about With Langstroth, how many boxes do you need for a typical colony? With lay-ins, are you going to use 20 frame insulated, 20 frame not insulated, 12 frame, 14 frame? So there's all sorts of variables. And even in Langstroth, 8 frame, 10 frame, and so on. So I could make this spreadsheet huge and complicated, but I tried to keep it small and simple. And
small and simple is good.
And so, just looking at the expenses, and this is, for those who have been keeping for a while, this may not be news, but Langstroth, now the prices I got for a lot of this equipment are based on the price listings for Isabee's Beekeeping, which is our local beekeeping store here in the St. Louis area. And they actually, to their credit, being a lay-ins keeper, they do carry some lay-ins frames and swarm traps. Nice. So I found that interesting. So Langstroth, they have a kit that includes a telescoping cover, inner cover, 2 deep boxes, 2 medium boxes with frames, foundation for the frames, and the bottom board. And keeping a few Langstroth hives myself, I probably shouldn't air my grievances too much with Langstroth being as popular as it is, but this is one of my headaches with Langstroth is you need so many pieces for a Langstroth hive. And that's $300 for the kit price, but that is 4 boxes. And, how far are you going to need more supers? Are you going to need, it seems like everything grows from there. Lay-ins, for an insulated 20 frame hive, you're looking at about $500 if you're buying. And that includes the hive. It includes 20 frames, and the foundation is sold separately. The frames are wired, but they don't have the foundation. So that's an extra expense there. But once you buy that box, you have the box. You're not going to be adding on. Now, even Dr. Leo, he has some setups that will take supers for the lay-ins hive. I'm not a big supering guy, but if somebody wants to add on boxes, you can, I suppose. But technically, once you have that box, you're not going to be adding additional boxes. Now, you can save a lot of money by building. And Freedom Lover, mentioned here that beekeeping is expensive, especially if you're not handy. And that is true. And
you become handy real quick.
I'm going to be asking you specifically here once we go through this about your experience, because I know I was actually just, we'll call it show prep because that makes me sound professional. But I was rewatching your video from a year ago that you were talking about all the stuff that you had bought from Dr. Leo. And I'd like, in a little bit, I'll come to you and ask you what you might do differently or if you do anything differently. So we'll come around to that. But as far as building the equipment, now a Langstroth box is basically built out of 1x lumber. And so it should be fairly cheap and simple to build. The most complicated thing is that most Langstroth boxes are built with finger joints on the corners, which helps with stability and helps to reduce warping. And those can be tricky. I will be honest, I do a lot of my own, construction on the hive equipment. I built all my own lay-ins hives, but I buy my Langstroth equipment. If I need a Langstroth box, I go to Isabee's and will pick up the boxes. But then as far as the lay-ins box, I actually just ran the numbers on this. And this, I know you just built some lay-ins boxes. And I know you're a numbers person, Elizabeth, because whenever I've built something, you've asked me, how much do you think it cost to build this? And I'm like, I don't know. But I did run numbers, and I came up with a price of about $175 to build a 20-frame insulated lay-ins box. Is that kind of in line with what you've found?
Yeah, I think last time when I figured it up, it was about $125, or maybe $150 each, something like that. So in that realm. And the only other thing I'm noticing on here, which is a pretty minor expense, but just something that I didn't think about when I was making the hives, and I wish I had, was three little things. One would be the divider board. One would be the boards to go underneath the hive, in between the hive and the cement blocks, and then the cement blocks to prop it up on.
Yeah,
So
and
those
I
are
do
pretty
have,
minor expenses.
as I scroll down, we'll get to hive stands, which is a
Oh, I
consideration.
gotcha.
I forgot to mention the divider board. Now, if you buy the layens hive, it usually includes a divider board. If you're building, a divider board is super easy to build. It's a board. But yeah, you're right. That is an additional price. And of course, this build is based on our local Home Depot, assuming you're going to be buying all of your lumber. If you can find scrap lumber, find a construction site and dig in the scrap pile or whatever, you can save a ton of money. My first insulated layens hive build I built with my friend Jason Crakey, and Jason has a knack for finding stuff, on the cheap. And I think part of it, he's kind of a blessed guy. He will help you with anything in the world. If you need any help, he will. He came and helped. I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I needed help moving some hives to a remote location. And I contacted Jason and said, hey, would you mind helping me on this morning? He's like, oh yeah, no problem. Now, what I didn't expect is that Jason, he didn't say, oh, well, I'm not off work that day, so I can't, or whatever, which would have been perfectly acceptable. He instead showed up to help me move these hives and level dirt and stuff in his dress work clothes. So he's willing to help anyone. And I think because he's so willing to bless others, he gets blessed in return. But when we built these, our first set of hives, he had come into a bunch of scrap plywood that was the correct dimensions for the plans. That was, somebody had reclaimed it from a Kmart that was torn down. So,
wow.
So that makes it cheap. If you can find scrap lumber, coming back to our point, that makes it even cheaper. So Jeffrey said, what's your thought on making the layens hives out of 2x lumber instead of plywood? Perfectly valid. Yeah, the plans are, and that's just another option in the variables that are out there. And you do lose some insulating factor, but it's still going to be twice as thick as the standard, 1-inch hive lumber. So it's perfectly valid, and it's going to be cheaper. So Freedom Lover, how much do you spend on layens frames without foundation? Glad you asked. Let's move down the spreadsheet. So some additional stuff, and I don't have prices on all of these because some of it is just pretty variable. So, swarm traps, if you are buying your swarm traps, you're probably looking at spending $100 to $150. If you're building, now this is based on the horizontal hive plans for layens swarm traps, where I think you can build 10 out of 2 sheets of plywood or something. So you're looking about $25 a trap.
That's my winter project.
All right. And I did not put a price on swarm traps for Langstroth boxes because you can use a deep Langstroth box as a swarm trap, and that's pretty straightforward.
And I think I've seen people using like 5-gallon buckets and all sorts of things.
Oh, also, yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing. There's all sorts of, they sell these pressed paper ones that are kind of they're kind of cone shaped almost, and they look weird. My concern about using something that's not that, okay, somebody's going to attack me saying I'm a natural beekeeper, and now I'm advocating for movable frame hives. But, my concern about doing something doesn't have movable frames is that you've got to transfer those bees from that oddly shaped container into a hive at some point. So you're catching a swarm, and then you're doing basically a cutout, it seems.
Better be good at catching queens.
Yeah. Then you have your foundation. Now, the price of foundation will vary. Maybe you can help me out, Elizabeth. I know Dr. Leo sells very pure foundation that's sourced from Spain. And you had blessed me with some of that. It's really nice stuff. It's real soft, nice to work with. That softness can be a liability in the heat of summer sometimes, but off the top of your head, I should have looked on his website. What's the What's the price as you recall of foundation?
Oh, well, I can tell you definitely from memory. I'm definitely not looking at the website, but it happens to be $50 for 14 sheets.
Okay.
Excuse me, or $250 for 90 sheets.
Okay. Which, a sheet, a lot of people will use the full sheet for a frame. I prefer to cut the sheet, and I, can make 5 starter strips out of 1 sheet of foundation for lay-ins frames. I have also in the past, because I'm cheap, have found Langstroth unwired wax foundation on clearance, and I'll just cut those sheets to make strips for the lay-ins hives.
And Monty, I don't know, I don't think you've tried this yet, or at least I haven't seen it in your videos, but some people on the Lay-ins Facebook group have suggested just notching the center of a frame and putting like a popsicle stick in it as a kind of a guide. Have you tried that, or do you think that would be worthwhile?
I have not tried that, but I've heard that it'll work, and it can be helpful if you use, some sort of a wooden strip as a starter. I've seen lots of people doing that exact thing. The one thing I think is helpful is to coat that with wax if you want to do that. So, if you want to do it that way, let the bees build all natural comb, you're not going to have that expense of foundation. One thing I think I'm going to be doing on future frame builds is cutting a groove down the middle of the bottom side of my top bars before I assemble the frames, so that I can kind of slide the foundation against the wires and then up into the groove, and it might hold in there a little better. Sorry, I digress. So then we got the hive stands. You mentioned, I think you like I have been using like 4 cinder blocks for a hive stand, and it works just fine. I actually here's a little teaser. Somebody I met at the Ozarks Homesteading Expo, and I won't say too much now because I'm saving it for a video, but they have come up with a design for a metal hive stand specifically for the lay-ins hives. Woo! And they sent me one. They haven't got it on the market yet, but they sent me one to try it out and give my feedback. So that's one video that's in the works, is to try that and review it and give them the feedback as well as put the video out there. So,
and can I ask you another question there, Monty?
Sure.
Well, it has more to do with the frame and foundation. I had one hive succumb to comb collapse. It was an uninsulated hive, et cetera, and I ended up with I have about 3 pounds of beeswax at this point from harvesting a lot of different hives, and I'm thinking about making my own foundation. Do you know of any like silicone molds or something that you could put foundation in and like make your own foundation?
I have seen some videos of people making presses to make their own foundation.
Okay.
Commercial presses are extremely expensive.
Sure.
So I think that's why more people don't do that. But I have seen some people who they go through a whole process of putting silicone on a sheet of plastic foundation, and then that makes a mold, and then that makes a negative, and they make a positive. And I'm not a casting person, but
this is digressing a little bit too. But if you gave bees just a strip of wax that doesn't have the perforations, they would build out the perforations, wouldn't they? They're in their cells. Maybe I'll experiment with that.
I see Jeff says his experiment with pre-waxing the wax frames was amazing. So are you saying, I think you mentioned this on the last live stream, Jeff, are you saying that you had wax foundation, but then you added wax? Oh, okay. So you didn't wax the wax foundation, you just use wax foundation. Is that correct? We'll move along so that give him a little time. Now, storage is something that I don't think a lot of people talk about or consider. So yes, so he's talking about the wax foundation, and you're talking about full sheets. They pulled it out very quickly. Yeah, and I will tell you, I think it would be hard to experiment because how quickly the bees build wax. I guess you could put a bunch of different types of frames in and see what the bees do, but I had one hive this year that just went great guns. They were a hive I moved to a remote location. I gave them frames with just about a 2 3/4 inch starter strip. And because they were out remote and I knew I wasn't going to be checking on them for a while, I put 5 frames with starter strip in the hive. So
you're thinking that'll be good for a long time.
I set them up, give them 5 extra hive and 5 extra frames. And then I put some other frames in the open end of the hive, just kind of to have their extra. So I didn't have to carry frames when I came to check on the hive. And I pushed those frames in the open end up against the divider board to kind of keep the divider board standing upright because I didn't have the whole hive full of frames. When I came back to check, those 5 frames, and this was a month later, those 5 frames, 5 lay-ins frames were completely built out, and they had gone under the divider board and started building on the other frames. So,
wow.
And that was just with starter strips. So, it'd be an interesting experience. And hive to hive, now I had 3 hives in that location. The other 2 didn't build that fast. So it's kind of a hard test to say, the bees built faster on this than another because there's so many variables in that. So anyway, I was starting to say that storage is something I don't think a lot of people think about when they start getting into beekeeping. But especially if you're dealing with Langstroth hives, you're going to be dealing with a lot of boxes. So at the end of the season, you got, as you pull off supers and things, you've got to store that stuff somewhere. Even with the lay-ins hives, as you pull out frames and harvest, you got to store those somewhere. Or your swarm traps, you got to store those somewhere. So, I see these pictures and I think it's kind of like a flex for a lot of beekeepers. And I'm not saying it's not worth flexing, but to show these huge stacks and boxes taking up the back of this huge garage. But you got to plan for that space. It's not necessarily a dollar cost unless you're buying a shed or something to store stuff or buying a storage unit. But it is a cost of space. You're going to have to give up that space.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was one thing. This is only my 2nd year, but going into my first winter, I didn't have to think about that at all. I had 4 hives. They were all in, everything was being used over the winter, it seemed like. And now that I have 10 colonies, it's like, oh yeah, I've got a whole bunch of frames. Where am I going to put all these? So storage.
Well, I did see your video that you built the Dr. Leo's frame holder, and I need to do that too, because I just cleaned out my garage today and I had frames stacked all over because I didn't have a good storage solution for them.
And I find frames on my porch and my patio and like in the barn and yeah.
Yeah, George mentioned from the Iowa Lay-ins Beekeeping mentions that every other frame with at least some foundation minimizes cross comb. And on that point, I agree with that point. Something I did last year is when I harvested, I had some frames, some of the lay-ins frames, after I'd harvested, the comb was kind of cracked and it looked like it may not make it through another season. So what I did with those is I cut out all the comb, harvested that wax, and I left about 1 inch of comb at the top of the frame. I figured, here's this comb, let the bees build down from that. I thought it'd be great. Not only is it a starter strip, but it's starter comb. Well, what I found, this is really interesting to me. When the bees had starter strip, they built between the wires. It's like they would build down between the wires, and then as a last resort, they would build on the wires. After there was already wax on those wires, and this is probably the lesson here is probably wax your wires, but after there was already wax on the wires, they built down on the wires before they built in between.
Interesting.
And because they were building on the wire, but not necessarily from the comb. I mean, they started at the top where the comb was, but then they just built down, and that wax on the wires just went every which direction. So I had, so I was going in there like trying to turn the wax, to be in line. So that's a good point, George, that if you have some foundation on at least every other frame, that helps to kind of keep things straight. Jeff said, I bought the foundation from Dr. Leo. They were taking their time in building out frames, so I pulled out 3 frames that they were not doing and put extra wax. Oh, okay. So you did have have some frames that put extra wax on them. So this is putting extra wax on the wax foundation. And you found that that helped you. So that's really interesting to me. Going along on the prices. Now, this beekeeping equipment is pretty general, and this was something like this list started with 3 things. So your veil or your suit, your smoker, and your hive tool. And then I'd be walking around the house like, oh, I forgot this. I forgot this. And I'd go out, clean the garage, like, oh, I ought to list those too. And again, prices vary widely. So your veil or your suit. Now, I prefer to work in a veil, and and that's it.
I don't know how you do it. I still don't know how you do it. Put it in the comments, people. Do you use a whole suit, just a jacket, or just a veil like crazy suburban Sodbuster?
But going that route, you're looking at about $25. I do have a jacket, in case, jacket and gloves and everything in case the bees seem particularly spicy. But looking at the prices on Isabees, and I know there are more expensive options out there, but on their site, for a full suit, it ran up to about $125. So, you're looking at your range and what you're comfortable with. And I would encourage anyone, I don't disparage anyone who doesn't work. If you want to wear gloves and a full suit and everything, and that's how you feel comfortable, then more power to you. I think there is a lot of truth in the fact that the bees can kind of sense and operate off of your level of anxiety. So if you are out there and your adrenaline is pumping and you're anxious and worried, the bees are going to respond to that. Now, I haven't read studies about that, but that's just my gut feel, and I've heard people talk about it. But so if wearing a jacket and gloves helps you to be more relaxed and working with the bees, then by all means. I will find some days when I go out, and working barehanded, especially if I get a hive that's particularly active, I'll find myself starting to get a little more anxious, and the whole beekeeping process becomes an active meditation. I'm out there carefully controlling my breathing, slowing my breathing, and working
cool.
slowly, and it seems to work. But yeah, so whatever works for you, but you just got to figure you're going to have the cost involved with that. Gloves, I will say, I think every pair of gloves I ordered off of Amazon, or they came as a cheap giveaway with something else, some other piece of beekeeping equipment I ordered off of Amazon, and they're so, I would love to buy everything I can made in America, but sometimes for the sake of cost, if I can find something on Amazon and get it cheap, and they're like, and here's a pair of gloves for free. Okay, fine.
Hook, line, and sinker. They got you.
Yeah. So I don't even. I should have looked at the price of gloves on Isabees. I didn't even look. Smokers, you're going to be spending from $25 to $60 is what I found. Again, it's going to depend on, are you buying cheap off of Amazon, or are you buying a name brand? Are you buying a small smoker or a big smoker? And that's going to depend on how many hives you plan to work. So so there's some variability there. Hive tools, a hive tool that Isabees runs on average $10. It's going to depend on the type of hive tool you like. What type of hive tool do you like, Elizabeth?
I like the kind of hive tool that came with my bee supplies. I have no idea what it is.
And that's, I just use the flat ones with the J hook on it.
Yeah, I have one of those and one of the other ones.
And I think, again, going cheap on Amazon, I think I order them for like 3 for $10 or $14 or something. So, and it's always good. And you can't buy one hive tool because you're going to set your hive tool down somewhere. So it's always good to have an extra.
I did find something that works pretty well, though. I found that I used some paracord and I tied my hive tool to my jacket. And so now it always stays in my pocket, or it's always within 2 feet.
Nice.
The only problem is that I tied it to my zipper that goes right down the chest. And so if it does fall out, then the whole zipper kind of comes off. So maybe we should pick a different zipper, but just secure it to your jacket.
It's something I've thought about, is buying a bunch of cheap hive tools off Amazon and just, in the layings hive, since the the bars touch, just laying one on top of the frames in each layman's hive, and then I wouldn't have to carry one. But my luck, I would go out to check a remote hive and have forgotten to leave a hive tool there. But so I always carry at least 2 with me. Then a bee brush, I don't remember what the cost is on a bee brush. A lot of times they come with, if you buy a kit of stuff off of Amazon, they usually include a bee brush. A lot of people don't use them. That's fine. I actually kind of like using. The thing about a bee brush is that bees hate being rolled. So if you take a bee brush and you're just sweeping the frame, you're going to roll a bunch of bees, preferably not roll your queen. You got to watch for that. And you're going to make the bees mad. And that, I learned that early on. What I learned this year is that you can get away with using the bee brush if you do it in short strokes. So if you just go down and just kind of whisking the bees off little by little. It takes a little longer, but it's effective. And you can get away. I was able to do it. Previously, I went full suit when I was robbing the hives of honey. And because when I try to brush the bees off, they're getting mad. If it's hot out, if I'm harvesting in June and it's hot out, and I have frames that are mostly natural comb, I don't want to take that heavy honey frame and be, shaking it hard, because it may very well collapse and then I got a mess. So I find the brush is an easier way to get the bees off. Then feeders. There's so many different types of feeders. I think in the lay-ins hives, a lot of people will typically use the frame feeder. Don't remember what the cost is on that frame feeder, but I think I bought like a 5-pack or something from Dr. Leo, and but it's another cost that you're going to want to consider. Even if, I do not promote feeding the bees as a rule, but this time of year going into winter, if you've got a weak hive that you want to bulk up for winter, I'm not going to argue with. I've got a few hives I'm feeding to get ready for winter. Scandal. But I don't do it as a practice. I don't like the practice of feeding in the spring to build up their numbers, or anything. But I would prefer just to leave them with enough resources to get through winter and spring. That worked well this year. Other years may have different results. Then we get into treatment equipment. So for those who are... yes.
A little tiny thing before... Well, sorry, it could have been after treatment equipment. The queen clip might be something you might add to that.
Oh, yeah, queen clip. Yeah, they're
handy. And then kind of another optional one, which I don't have. I think you might have it. Would be the queen marking kit.
Yeah, and I will add that to I may try to put a link to this list for someone who wants to, look at it.
You do mark your queens, don't you?
I do when it works. I've got some hives that I haven't marked the queens. Now I do keep records. This year I kept better records, so I know, even if I get into a hive that has an unmarked queen, I have a pretty good idea. Is that a new queen this year or what? I don't think I have any queens that overwintered that are unmarked. So all my unmarked queens are from this year. Mm-hmm. But I will, if I get in there and I see the queen, and she's not marked, I'll go ahead and mark her. But I don't spend a lot of time trying to look for the queen specifically to mark them. And I have had some times where if it's a sketchy situation, if I'm having trouble, if I see the queen, she's unmarked, but I'm just having trouble getting hands on her, I'm not going to stress over it.
Sure. Yeah.
So. I'll have to come back and add some prices in here if I post this for people to use as a reference. So now here's some stuff that I do not own is, for treatment, if you're doing OA vaporization, look like on Isabee's website. I'm sure there's different possibilities, but a vaporizer, we're looking at about $140. And then if you're going to be doing OA vaporization, you want a respirator. And I'm not even sure what the cost is on a respirator. And, so those are costs that now they're one-time costs for the vaporizer and the respirator, except for, I guess you got to replace the filters on the respirator. But that is an expense you're going to have that, if you're treatment free, you don't really have to worry about. An extractor. And, an extractor is not something that you will typically need in your first year. So even if you happen to have enough honey to harvest in the first year, cut, what am I trying to say? Crush and strain can be a good way to go, just to get that first harvest, get your first taste of your own honey. I remember it was exciting. The first time you can taste your own honey. I remember at your house, Elizabeth, when we were moving those bees out of that old Langstroth hive that was been sitting there forever, and we gave that comb of honey to the kids. And
I absolutely loved it. Yeah, it's a really, really powerful first moment.
Mm-hmm. But
I always wondered why so many people wanted to do the crush and strain, because I would think it would be so much more work for the bees to build all that new comb next year, but it just depends.
Yeah, I mean, I bought the extractor first, and then this year I bought not Dr. Leo's, but I bought another press, the fruit press, and it's not, when it comes in handy is when you're extracting from the layens frames and you have comb blowout.
Yeah.
And so then you can, kind of dig that comb out of the extractor and throw it into your press and crush it out. If you got a small amount, you can just scrape it into a kitchen strainer and use a spoon to press it through the strainer. That works fine. I've seen some people will put it in a bucket and basically smash it with a clean stick and smash the honey out, but then you got to filter it out anyway. But
yeah.
But yeah, it's not really hard to do it. But like you say, if crush and strain is your only approach, then you're going to be, removing all of the honey that you could potentially give back to the bees if you use a rotary extractor. So as far as the cost of extractors, and this is something that a lot of people use as an argument against the layens hives, and I think that's unwarranted, and I'll explain why. Because an extractor, you can get a cheap Langstroth extractor you can probably find them less than $250 for a very small one. But, I put $250 and up as kind of a starting price. And of course, the size of the extractor is going to affect that price. Is it a 2-frame, 4-frame, 9-frame, and so on? And this is why I say I don't think concerns about the higher price of the layens extractors is necessarily warranted, because the layens extractor, now I put 600 plus. That's what I paid for mine. I bought the SAF extractor, which is the same one Dr. Leo sells. I bought it from Miller Bee Supply, and it was $600 delivered to my door at the time that I ordered it. That was a couple years ago. Inflation has pushed prices up since then. So you may not be able to find one for $600 today. But what I found is that SAF, it's the SAF Regatta that has the layens basket, the 3-frame layens basket. That is the same, the case that's used, case is probably the wrong word, but the tub that's used for that extractor is the exact same one that they use, and I can't remember the name, but it's actually the name that's stamped on the side of the extractor that they use for their 9-frame radial extractor for Langstroth frames. And it's very easy to pull the lid off and swap out baskets if you really want to. You can get the layens basket, you can get the radial basket for Langstroth frames, but there's not really a need. And let me I interrupted myself in my own stream of thought. But when I realized it was the same tub as the 9-frame radial extractor, I started pricing 9-frame Langstroth radial extractors and found that that price is right in line with what you can find in the market. So to compare a cheap 2 or 4 frame Langstroth extractor to a Layens extractor is apples to oranges. You really have to compare the comparable Langstroth 9-frame extractor to the Layens extractor to have a fair comparison.
It's like clementines to oranges.
Yeah, there you go. But now I interrupted myself earlier. Oh, as far as the swapping the baskets, I found it's not really necessary because once you have the Layens extractor, the Layens basket, it will fit the Langstroth frames, or the Langstroth frames will fit in it. So my last harvest, I had some Langstroth. I actually had some shallow frames and I had some deep frames that I extracted. And, you know, we did the Layens frames, we did the Langstroth frames, and it all worked fine using the same Layens basket. So I didn't really see a need to buy the 9-frame, basket for it. The only thing you got to consider is you got 3 slots in the basket and you got to try to balance it out. So sometimes the math got a little complicated. So that's anything else that you wanted to add about the extractor?
No, but I'm glad you pointed that out, though. It's nice to know that there's some different options, or at least that other options are comparable.
Yeah. And on the market now, just a couple of years ago, the SAF extractor was pretty much the only game in town. But now there's at least 2 others on the market in the U.S. So,
nice.
Yeah, in the European market, maybe there were others available. I don't know. But in the U.S., I know there's at least 2 others. And I would say the names, but they're slipping my mind right now. But maybe I'll add a note in my spreadsheet if I post the link to it. Now, I don't like the term livestock in reference to bees, but it seemed to fit when you're talking about acquiring, any sort of animal. If you're buying a package, which is what most people do when they get into beekeeping, you're looking at $150 to $200 per colony. If you buy a nucleus, you're going to be spending some more, probably around $200 to $300 per colony. But if you catch swarms, your cost is the cost of the swarm trap, which is a one-time cost. And then, a trap out, if you do a trap out or a cutout, then your cost is your time, labor, and whatever hardware you need to put the bees in, which again, the hardware is a one-time cost. So, I talked earlier about beekeepers using a flex, their flex being how much equipment they have stacked up in the garage. My flex is that I've never paid for a colony of bees. I bought a couple queens, but I've never had to pay for a colony of queens. I've sold a few, but which is a nice nice racket, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I say is you are someone who actually bought one of my colonies.
That's right.
And then we have our consumables. I'm trying to scroll on the wrong screen. Okay. Now, if you feed your bees, you've got sugar and pollen substitute. Pollen substitute comes in different forms, whether it's the patties or powder or however you feed it. So I really wasn't sure how to, price that on here per hive. I guess I could just list a range like I have in other places. Early on, I bought 2 containers of dry pollen substitute. This was my first year, and I open fed 1 container, and the other one is still sitting in the garage. I don't remember what I paid for it, but I should probably try to sell that.
Confessions of a natural beekeeper.
Well, and since then, and this is a little bit of a side topic. Since then, I've learned that a lot of the pollen substitute, especially if it contains soy, can actually be detrimental to the health of the bees. But that's not. That's something I learned from Natalie and Les Crowder at Be Mindful, and I don't have any more. don't have the expertise to share any more about that, but it was concerning enough information that, I decided I didn't see a benefit to feeding pollen substitute. Plus, I found that around here, if the weather warms up enough, if the weather is warm enough that the bees are foraging, I see them bringing in pollen at all sorts of times of the year. So my bees never seem to have a problem finding pollen. Sugar, if a person feeds their bees, of course, you're going to have the sugar costs. Again, this is one of those things that kind of seems like a flex for some beekeepers. They'll post pictures of, here's my, 1,000-gallon tank that I use to feed my hives. And, if you're a commercial operation feeding hundreds or thousands of hives, I guess that's what you need. See people buying sugar in those huge, I don't know what you call them, industrial bags that require a crane
Forklift
to lift them. Yeah. So that's kind of a flex for some, I guess. But I think my sugar expense for this fall, I bought about 40 pounds of sugar. So so I don't have much flex there. Treatments, you've got, and this is just, I pulled the prices off. Apiguard, you're looking about $10 a hive. That's not terribly expensive. Apivar was $40 for 10 strips. I don't know how many strips you use to treat a hive. 2 to 4, I'm guessing, but that's a guess. Probably shouldn't even guess. And then oxalic acid for 227 grams, which again, I don't know how far that goes. It was a container, so I'm guessing it is about $20. So the consumables for treatments aren't that expensive per purchase. Although Apiguard, if you had multiple hives you're treating, that could add up pretty quickly. That $10 per hive. But again, if you're treatment free, then that's a big zero right there. And then I added supplements in there. Again, even when I'm feeding sugar, this is like the Honey Be Healthy and a lot of the stuff. I see a lot of it being promoted now to add to the bees' food. And, I feel like the bees have been, foraging and providing for themselves for centuries. I don't see a need to mess with that.
Preach.
So that's kind of the stuff we reached the bottom of my list. What am I missing?
The only other thing I came up with, depending on your location, is that a lot of Langstroth keepers need to have some sort of, need to plan on some sort of insulative material to go around their hives in the winter. And then the only other consumable would be that if you plan to harvest, any amount of honey, you're going to need jars to put it in, or some kind of bottle.
Yes, that's true. And that is, and I want to respond to that, but Jerry posted that Hilco is one of the manufacturers of a Layens extractor. They make a Layens sized extractor now. So thanks, Jerry, for pointing that out. But yeah, the jars is a good point, because I see now from our first harvest, I have sold honey. And, the first year we harvested, I paid off my Layens extractor. So that was nice. And so the purchasing the jars was just a factor in the price of the product, but I do know a lot of people will post on Facebook and so on, when you get into conversations about how much to charge for honey. And there's some people who will come in and say, well, I don't sell my honey. I just harvest it to give away to friends and family or so on. Well, that's fine. But then, that cost of the jars becomes your expense. You're not going to make that back. So
it's very generous. It's a very bad business plan.
Yes. But yeah, more power to it, and I'm not going to tell someone that they have to sell their honey or whatever. I just, now, if your people are going to sell their honey, I appreciate if they don't short sell the market in our area, but that's a whole other topic. So maybe that's a topic for a future one, is about marketing and selling honey. So I will change the screen here. Okay. So we've gotten through that spreadsheet, and I will maybe add a few more prices, and I'll just put a link to that spreadsheet. I'll try to post it out where people can access it. And if anybody wants to download that and use it for your own planning or whatever, feel free. There's nothing proprietary there. So Elizabeth, I did want, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted you to talk a little bit. When you were starting out, you bought, everything you needed to get yourself started.
Yeah.
And
then
now
some.
you're doing a lot of your own building. You're building your frames, building your hives, and so on. And so, I'm kind of curious, comparing what you were doing before to now, would you do it differently?
That's a really good question. I think the only thing I might do differently would be purchasing only one 20 frame insulated hive instead of multiple. But other than that, it was a significant investment for our family. It's not like we have thousands of dollars just laying around, but it's kind of part of the homestead business. And so I'm really thankful that I started the way I did. If I was maybe more like you and a little bit more handy and I knew how to make stuff, I probably would have gone that route. But not having those skills, it was like, well, I want to start somewhere. So I'm going to make this investment and make a plan to recoup that money over time. But I'm really glad that I purchased them so I could just look at them, since I'm not, I mean, I still wouldn't call myself very, great with tools, but I'm way better than I was. But I'm glad that I just had it and I was able to see it and I was able to touch it and I was able to know why the dimensions and the plans were the way they were. So I could know if I mess up here, there's a little bit of wiggle room, but you really shouldn't mess up here. But without having any sort of prior building experience, that would have just been way over my head. So overall, I'm very glad with the purchases that I made. And then going into my first fall and now my second year, feeling much more confident in building my own and in building frames and things like that. So yeah, and the only thing I haven't used has been the queen excluder. I haven't used that, but I really like having the 12 and 14 frame hives because they are a lot easier to move if I want to do a split and just physically take some from one place to the next. But I have put handles on some of them, so my husband will help me move stuff. I've used the extractor. I've used the stand. I've definitely used the books. I have them sitting over here. So overall, I'm really happy with the purchases.
Yeah, and that's what I was, kind of thinking. And as was pointed out in the chat, and we, showed on the spreadsheet, you can save. I think the number, I can't remember now who it was who said it, and apologize for that. But someone said they typically will save about 75% by building versus buying. But to be able to get into it, get that start, it's, to use a different analogy, I was just talking with my son the other day because he took his car in to get an oil change and found out that he has some significant work that needs done on it. And it's maintenance work that's just been put off, for a long time. And so because of a lot of that, I said, well, we might be able to do this and that and so on. But then the more we talked about it, we kind of came to the conclusion that, yes, we could probably save a significant amount of money, but by paying the shop to do it, we're buying expertise. And
sure.
And I think that's kind of, for a lot of people getting into beekeeping, it's kind of the way a lot of people will start is just, shell out the money to buy the stuff because they don't have the confidence yet to build it. But by doing that, you get the expertise, you're getting the box done right. You're getting the equipment so you can get started in learning how to keep bees, and then gradually or organically, and as you have, kind of move into learning the skills to then build it so you can develop from there. Which
I guess another way to think of it is you limit the room for error, because if I had made all my own stuff and I had made some errors and then I have bees for the first time and I make some errors, like we're kind of compounding errors. But at least, like you said, at least I know the equipment's super solid, and then my trial and error can hopefully not be too detrimental to the bees.
Right. As we were talking through the expenses and through your own experience, have you found any places where you've been able to save money that maybe I didn't mention?
Well, I'm glad that you brought up places where people can save money, because in the same way that I started by buying stuff and I could focus on my knowledge with the bees, now I feel like, okay, I'm building stuff, but I need to purchase the wood. I need to know that it's the right dimensions. So I'm not at the place in my confidence where I could buy scrap wood and try to make it work. That's where I'm like, I'll get there someday, but right now I need to buy all these 2x10s and 1x whatevers. So I can't answer that. Where do you often find that you can find some? You mentioned your friend found some from a Walmart that was closing down. You just kind of keep your eyes open for things like that?
I don't know where he came up with that. He has over the years built a lot of connections, and in his career, he's very much a people person to start with, and in his career, he's in contact with a lot of people. So he has built a lot of connections, and that's helpful. But you just kind of look it up, find your opportunities where you can see them. I've mentioned, construction sites. Now, some might let you, some may not. But if you see, some house building going on and you go in and say, hey, do you guys have a scrap pile that you'd mind if I, forage in? They may not care,
Nice.
But, so that's the possibility. You just got to look for your opportunity. And I think, I talk a lot to people like yourself who are homesteaders, and I think that's kind of part of the homesteading mindset is looking for opportunities. And I with my gardens here in my backyard, I use a lot of wood chips for garden paths and so on. The other day they were cutting down a big tree across the street from me, so I walked across the street. I said, "Hey, you guys have to pay to dump your wood chips?" And they're like, well, yeah. I said, well, go dump them on my driveway. And they thought I was nuts. I've got a mountain of wood chips on my driveway right now.
I've done that before. Now I live too far out in the country where I can't get them, but I had the same thing in the last place we lived.
But you got to look for those opportunities. And I think that's where a lot of people get stressed out as they're getting into beekeeping, because I see the discussions online of someone will ask, what does it cost to get into beekeeping? And I see more discouragement than I see encouragement in the responses. I think a lot of that, I see things along the lines of, well, if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't even consider it. And I think a lot of that's along the lines of that you're going to buy everything. You're going to buy your boxes. You're going to buy your bees. You're going to, buy a full suit. You're going to buy, everything. You're going to, and in the mindset of conventional beekeeping, you're going to have to buy an OA vaporizer and a, respirator and all the treatment. And for times of the year when it's not right for OA, you're going to have to buy other treatments and do this and that. And so I think that consumption mindset that you're just going to have to lay out money for everything you want. I think that's part of the mindset that I want to try to counter that, no, you don't have. Now, catching bees is less reliable. If you want to say, I want to have bees next May, the sure way to do it is to order a package.
Yep.
And I understand that. I think the better way to go about it and the cheaper way is to plan to put out swarm traps. As I was cleaning my garage today, I put 4 swarm traps together for the spring. They're all, they got the, old comb and everything is ready. It's in my shed. So in the spring, I just have to pull them out and, put some bait in and I'm ready to go.
Yep.
But, plan for that rather than planning to just lay out money, more money for everything.
And this might be more of a tip for those who are homesteaders. But one thing that I would hope that people wouldn't disregard is the idea of bartering. And so I had a honey harvest this year. I didn't feel confident making frames, but now I do. But at the time, I reached out to you and I reached out to another natural beekeeper in our area. And I said, hey, what would you think of, well, I don't think I offered to trade honey with you, but just the idea of, well, would you be interested in trading honey for your time? And, I provide this and then you provide that part of it. And so bartering can be a really powerful tool as well. So not even just beekeeping skills, but whatever skills that you already have, teaching or welding or blacksmithing or whatever you do, seeing if there's people that you could exchange their skills for yours might be a really good way to go about it.
Right. So for those who are online, are there any additional thoughts? And I know coming into this, I should have set expectations because I hope nobody came on here with their notepad saying, okay, I'm going to come out of this live stream with a dollar amount that it's going to cost me to get into beekeeping. Because that wasn't my goal. It was just, to lay out kind of, here's the considerations and here's some possibilities for minimizing that. Does anyone have any other thoughts or questions? Maybe something we hadn't considered as far as the cost of beekeeping?
Some people have reached out to me after doing some bee days. Some people have reached out and said, hey, you've already gotten me sold. I already have this equipment, but I want to do the lay-ins. Are you going to sell any? And so I've considered that. And so the hard part for me is figuring out how much to charge for my time, because it's like it takes me at least 24 hours, so 3 full work days just to get the hive done, not to mention the painting and some of the other stuff. And so it's like, what's my time worth? That's a hard question for people to answer too, but something to keep in mind, I guess, if you're going to sell, especially.
Yeah. And that's actually a direction I'm looking at for the future is, possibly building and selling equipment. I had people reach out to me too, asking if I sold equipment, if I sold swarm traps or frames or hives, and hoping to get some of that built. I will be at the Okie Homesteading Expo in March.
Nice. Is that in a city called Okie?
It's Oklahoma.
Oh, okay, that kind of Okie. Got it.
I don't remember the town. It's in northeastern Oklahoma. I will have a booth there. I won't be. I contacted them about speaking, but they already had a beekeeper was their response. So, but anyway, so I'm hoping to have some equipment there that I'll be able to sell. So.
Woohoo!
So we are at an hour, just over an hour. Don't want to drag this out. Making your equipment, make beekeeping affordable. Yeah, and that's a good consideration. And kind of a theme behind this freedom lover is that beekeeping doesn't have to be, expensive or hard. That hard is another topic, but yeah, we want to try to make it accessible for people, but at the same time, as Elizabeth said, you don't want to undervalue your time and work. So that's a balancing act there. So I appreciate Elizabeth. I appreciate you and you coming on to talk about your experience. And I appreciate everyone else who has been online here. I would encourage you to go out and check out Elizabeth's channel if you're not already a subscriber, Curly Haired Country Gal. And she has information about what they're doing on their homestead and in her beekeeping. So appreciate the information you're putting out there. So thanks everyone for coming online. I appreciate you being here. Thanks everyone who's watching the replay, and I'll see you next time. Bye, Elizabeth.